Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the hearings of the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. These hearings are a process by which witnesses can present accounts of unjustified killings and maimings of Black individuals by police officers in the United States before an international panel of human rights experts. We now begin the hearing in the case of Barry Gedeus. My name is Marjorie Cohn, and I am the rapporteur for this hearing. Presiding over this hearing are Commissioners Arturo Fournier of Costa Rica and Commissioner Osamu Niikura of Japan. The witness for this hearing is Lee Friedland. There will be 50 minutes for this hearing. The witness will testify, followed by a period of questions from commissioners. I will call time at the 30-minute mark and the 45-minute mark. Please excuse my interruptions. Commissioners Fournier and Niikura, I now present to you the witness, Lee Friedland. Lee Friedland, please confirm your name.
I am Lee Friedland.
Do you promise that your testimony to the Commission of Inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do.
You may begin.
Thank you, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to express and represent Barry Gedeus in the hard work that is being engaged in, both on a national and international level, to fight the problems associated with police violence, which are represented in, we believe very clearly in Mr. Gedeus's case. As part of our case, it's important to understand the background of what the local environment is with relation to the police and their interrelation with the community, in our community of Fort Lauderdale. And that is, there are two primary policing organizations that police this community in Fort Lauderdale. The first being the Broward Sheriff's Office, which was not the police department directly involved in the shooting of Barry Gedeus, and the second is Fort Lauderdale Police Department. And the reason why that is important as background information in Barry's case is because what's been going on locally relative to these two policing organizations has been a rivalry of sorts. This is going back well before my time as a practicing lawyer in Fort Lauderdale. And as a result of this policing type rivalry, it affects the interactions of the minority communities with both of these policing agencies. And as you're going to learn tonight, specifically with Barry Gedeus and his interaction with the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. We, in our case, we're dealing with a specific officer who was fired by Fort Lauderdale back in 2006. His name is Officer Robert Morris. And the reason why I mention his name, even in conjunction, even on equal with Barry Gedeus, is because we have an officer who had a lengthy, specific history of engaging in acts of violence in the course of his duties as a Fort Lauderdale police officer. In essence, we have an officer who we've learned through our investigation who views his job as if he's engaging in an ongoing battle or war with the community that he is assigned to police in. And how is it that we know that? In addition to researching his background and his records specifically, we have had the opportunity, as part of some of the publicity that we had with our case locally, to learn from some of the communities and to gather video evidence of exactly how Robert Morris translates policing into action within our community. And that particular background colored his direct interaction with our client Barry Gedeus. First of all, Officer Morris is an officer who has had 84 separate use of force complaints in a career that began in 2006. These complaints are unusual for their explicit violence associated with both arresting and apprehending and interviewing suspects. We are aware of distinct episodes in which Robert Morris engaged in violent acts in association with his work as a Fort Lauderdale police officer. The first of which we became aware was in 2008, when Mr. Morris was called before a grand jury and asked to answer questions with regard to his shooting and killing of what we have learned through our investigation was an unarmed man. Now, in the course of the grand jury investigation, there was the allegation that Mr. Timothy Brown, who was gunned down, unarmed, we allege, had a piece or a segment of what appeared to allegedly Officer Morris to be a gun, which the grand jury determined justified the shooting. We have evidence, we believe, through both friends and family, that Timothy Brown was in fact unarmed back in 2008 and shot because he was suspected to be involved in an incident where firearms were used. Then we have another incident in 2013. And these are separate. These are individual incidents, not just part of these 89 complaints or 84 complaints that Officer Morris had. We have during the course of the arrest of a murder suspect, and this is why in the course of my presentation, I used as background the relationship between the Broward Sheriff's Office and the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. In the course of apprehending a murder suspect, there was a multi-jurisdictional investigation that was being conducted. Officer Morris was involved in apprehending this murder suspect. And as part of the apprehension, he released his police dog on the suspect. There was a deputy present, a Deputy Jeffrey Cogan for the Broward Sheriff's Office. He reported Officer Morris for the fact that upon releasing the dog, the suspect had already been in custody. In other words, he had released a dog to bite or attack a suspect who was already in custody and posed no threat to Officer Morris. Deputy Kagan went on record with this action, and there was another grand jury investigation impaneled locally here. The facts were explored. The state attorney ultimately took the lead in the investigation and found, as a result of interviewing multiple parties, that he took no action against Officer Morris, who again was acting out violently with regard to the work that he was sworn to do. A whistleblower lawsuit was filed by Deputy Cogan, and ultimately the court system resolved these issues. However, it never resolved the fact that Officer Morris had no business, frankly, based on his interactions with the community, being out there and policing. Which brings us to the circumstances in March 8th of last year that ended Barry Gedeus's life. Now, our firm has conducted an extensive investigation of what transpired, and the panel tonight should know that this investigation is still pending a grand jury, which has not been impaneled in Florida. We have as much confidence in the grand jury process for Robert Morris in this case as has been exhibited in the prior evaluations of his aggressive conduct as a police officer. In other words, we feel confident, or we lack confidence in the due process that they've been engaging here in Broward County for many, many years. And let me explain to you, at least based on the facts of the case, why we feel that way. First of all, to know Barry Gedeus is to know that he was a mild-mannered landscaper. Essentially, what he did was he would contract with individuals, he would use his weed whacker, and he would mow lawns throughout the community. He was living with his fiancee at the time, Alexis. And sometime around 8 o'clock in the evening, on March 8th, 2020, he left his home in the Fort Lauderdale area, and on his bicycle, he was proceeding to go to a Walmart. Now, what we learned is on his way to the Walmart, either before or after, he did have some sort of consensual encounter with a woman by the name of Vanessa Smith. Now, it's not my role to sully the name of a alleged victim, because ultimately she would allege that she was assaulted that night. But we've had the opportunity to both examine Ms. Smith's history, the fact that at the time she had recently been released from a drug and rehabilitation center, that she had demonstrated previously on several arrests an addiction to the street drug that's referred to as Flocka. We also had the opportunity in our investigation, and we have, I don't know if we can screen share today. Do we have that ability? We have some video evidence that establishes what transpired at the scene, because in the course of our investigation, we were able to get a video of a local church, which is right in the area of where the supposed assault of Ms. Smith occurred. But I can summarize the evidence. And of course, if you folks would like the opportunity to review it, we have it available for you to see, because it's important evidence as it relates to the actions of Officer Smith, which are to follow. And that is, there was some type of consensual encounter between Ms. Smith and Mr. Gedeus. And we know this because we have video. It's a grainy video, but it's a video nonetheless that depicts the circumstances of their interaction. In other words, some type of consensual interaction, which is very clear in terms of how they interacted.
Mr. Friedland,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
can screen share if you
No,
want to.
Greeny, I actually need my associate because I'm technically deficient.
Okay. Okay.
It's Greeny Valbuena. She's right there with the stand right behind her. Okay, and we're not going to, we gathered, there's a couple of significant pieces of video evidence. Now, the reason why this video evidence is significant from our standpoint in terms of the actions of the police officer, because it will not be disputed that Ms. Smith ultimately made the allegation that there had been some type of sexual assault. And obviously, this is not a video that was available to the police on the evening in question. The reason why we're showing the video is in part to establish that we believe we have definitive evidence of a consensual encounter. And secondarily, we have a time-stamped evidence that would indicate the actions of Robert Morris were well out of bounds of propriety and in violation of the use of force provisions that the Fort Lauderdale Police Department has in place. What we see here, and it's hard to see in the top left corner, if you see, I believe, hopefully her pointer is showing you, we see the grainy figure of a man at about 8:44 walking away from the alleyway in the area of the church. And this is a very important time frame for us because the alleged victim had left the area moments before, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes before, and she proceeded to a cell phone, to a telephone of a local business that's nearby in this area. That 8:44 time frame is important for us because we also know from the police CAD information, the information that indicates when the police is dispatched and when they interacted with Mr. Gedeus, that the interaction with Mr. Gedeus occurs sometime at about 9:11 or 9:15 in the evening. And the reason why that is important is because, and I don't know, Greeny, do you have the map of the neighborhood? Okay, so that's the area that we're showing in the video of the alleyway. There was determined to have been a DNA sample that matched my client and the alleged victim of the case. In other words, there was some type of consensual sexual encounter that occurred in the video. If the video further displays that by showing the two figures earlier walking down that alleyway, and then one of the figures leaving, and then of course Mr. Gedeus leaving at the time that we've shown. Now, the reason why I pulled up this map for you all to see this evening is we can see the dead-end alleyway, which is an alleyway by the church that we've depicted. But if Ms. Valbuena can show you the location of the shooting, which occurs, we have it timed out either 39 or 42 minutes later. And I will tell you, as she's moving the Google map into the area, we have it right this. So this is the intersection where Mr. Gedeus ultimately is confronted with Robert Morris, the police officer who was involved, who was the shooting, the officer who shot Barry Gedeus to death down this roadway. And the reason why we suggest that this is extremely important in outlining the actions of the police officers as being inappropriate is because Mr. Gedeus was located within blocks of where he allegedly committed a sexual assault roughly 40 minutes later, undermining whether or not, at least in his mind, what had occurred in that alleyway was anything less than a consensual interaction. So he has no reason to believe or run from police or flee or act violently. And we believe that the linchpin evidence that establishes what transpired at that corner is actually presently in possession of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, of which we have not got a copy yet. However, in our investigation, we did have an opportunity, and Greeny, if you can show the house, I don't know if you can turn the, we did have an opportunity to meet and review with the owner of this home. Serendipitously, this home is located right at the intersection with a camera that depicts that intersection. And of course, that night, the investigators who ultimately investigated the shooting of Mr. Gedeus went to that home, and they were able to retrieve video evidence, which we have not had the opportunity to see in its entirety. However, we have had the opportunity to review what was on this evidence with the owner of the camera, because as the evidence was being reviewed with the police that night back in March, I believe it was on the 21st, he sat there and reviewed the film with them and told us what it contained. And this is the key fact in what we believe is the murder of Barry Gedeus back on March 8th, 2020, which is that Robert Morris, this overzealous police officer with a history of acting in a fashion that is inappropriate and violent with suspects, including shooting and killing a suspect years before, happens to drive up Southwest 21st here at this intersection. And Mr. Gedeus, fitting the description of the bolo of someone who was involved in a sexual assault that was not a sexual assault, is on a bike and wearing dreads. When Morris visualizes our client, he then U-turns his vehicle up the roadway, turns around and turns, because Mr. Gedeus literally was slowly riding his bicycle up this Northwest 6th place towards that stop sign. Now, what we're told by the person who owned that home and reviewed the video is that what happens there is that the police officer aggressively pulls his car and strikes Barry Gedeus's bicycle to the point where the windshield of the police cruiser is cracked. In other words, Morris hits him with his car. There is a struggle that ensues there. Remember, Barry Gedeus has never had a firearm, isn't armed for any purpose. There's no allegation that he was armed whatsoever. There's a struggle. In other words, Robert Morris is reaching from his police cruiser, attempting to grab Barry Gedeus, and Barry throws his bike down, which is found in the center of this intersection, and sprints down Northwest 6th Place. Now, we know a lot about Barry Gedeus, some of which Robert Morris could not have known, which is that he, because of press issues, because of issues, is an extremely mild-mannered person. He's a non-violent human being. He sprints up 6th Place, and ultimately Morris catches up with him in front of this empty lot that you'll see in a minute. And when Morris gets there, we know, based on the cones that we found in the area, that there was at least 8 shots fired in close range to an unarmed Barry Gedeus who lies dead, crumpled in this lot. There are videos that we had the opportunity to see taken by neighbors in the area that clearly established that there was no firearm anywhere around Barry Gedeus. There was never a gun found. And to date, even though the grand jury has not been impaneled and we've never had the opportunity to take Officer Morris's testimony, there has not been an allegation of which we're aware that Barry had pulled or brandished a weapon in any way. Officer Morris is allegedly injured on the evening, and he receives medical treatment for a wrist injury. And as a result of that, he has never provided a statement to us or to the public which details his involvement in this shooting of Barry Gedeus. Ultimately, we were fortunate that there were neighbors in the area that were able to videotape and establish very clearly that there was no weapon in the area and that Barry Gedeus was unarmed and, in fact, executed by Robert Morris on March 8th, 2020. In the end of the day, we have issues in my case that need to be litigated. The reason why I've discussed the interjurisdictional issues between Broward Sheriff and Fort Lauderdale is that even in the course of this investigation, there were overarching or overlapping jurisdictional roles. The sexual battery investigation, which was ultimately closed, involved the Broward Sheriff's Office because of the jurisdiction. Fort Lauderdale has never investigated this adequately, and we know that Broward Sheriff's Office through the FDLE has never adequately investigated this. We've had an opportunity to speak with the lead FDLE investigator in the case, and we are awaiting, again, given the nascent stage of their investigation, even though it's been many years because of COVID, we're waiting the exchange of information associated with Mr. Gedeus's death. I think that covers the issues relative to the shooting. The police are asserting that this was a justifiable shooting because Barry Gedeus at the time was a fleeing felon. We have outlined in fact, that a lot of the things that they're saying shock the conscience and do not fit in with ordinary common sense. There was no reason for Morris to strike his vehicle against Barry Gedeus' bike, causing his windshield to break. At that time, Barry Gedeus feared for his life. And as a result, his life was taken. So we welcome any questions. I don't know, Greeny, do we have any other evidence we wanted to share?
Other than that he's back on duty, I think that's pretty relevant. Nobody was notified, and it actually happened at the moment when his fiance was, she's a security officer. She had to call police officers to escort a lady out of Winn-Dixie, and she runs into actually Robert Morris. Nobody was informed that he was back on duty. She wasn't told, and she immediately calls the sergeant and whoever is in charge, and they tell her, why did you approach Robert Morris?
Excuse me, please. I would like to swear the witness. What is your name, please?
Greeny Valbuena.
Greeny Valbuena. Do you affirm that your testimony before this commission of inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, ma'am.
You may proceed.
Thank you. She contacts the sergeant at the time in charge, and they kind of turned the events around and asked her why she was approaching Officer Robert Morris. Clearly, he came onto the scene after arriving after he had been dispatched, and as soon as she introduces herself to Robert Morris, he immediately covers his body cam, and both officers that arrived to the scene left the scene without even taking care of the reason why they actually arrived. Nobody ever came back. Nobody else from the department, nobody else from any other department came back to rectify the situation and the reason why they called the police officers to Winn-Dixie on that day. And this happened, I believe it was maybe 2 weeks ago when we found this out.
Could we take down the video now, please?
Oh, yes.
If you're finished. Thank you so much.
Yes. Let's see how we're, okay.
Thank you. Will there be further testimony in your opening statement?
I just wanted to kind of contextually put what happened in Fort Lauderdale based on our experience in practicing both criminal law and doing civil rights case here. The same investigation, if it was moved to a different community here, would have been handled much differently and much less aggressively. There would not have been the presumption that the person who had done these acts was either violent or posed a threat to the community. Anyone with a basic understanding of either that neighborhood and the nature of what appeared to be, even upon review of the 911 tape, to be questionable at best as to whether or not the suspect was violent in any way, would not have approached Barry Gedeus, even as a suspect, in such a violent and aggressive manner. If you transpose this event to Western Broward County and the suburbs, we're going to have an appropriate investigation where questions are asked and there's some level of determination as to whether or not the allegations have any merit before an officer goes sprinting through the streets, unloading his weapon into somebody. This happened in part, we believe, and is underscored by the fact of who Barry Gedeus is, the community that he lives in, and the fact that aggressive policing action was taken against him because the presumption was that he was guilty, not just guilty of being a suspect, but guilty as someone who had conducted a violent sexual assault when, frankly, the evidence, even at its nascent stage, was questionable at best. We are not suggesting the police should not have investigated the allegation. However, we are suggesting that had the allegation been investigated with fair police work in the way that it should be conducted, Barry Gedeus is not lying dead in March of last year, and the case essentially would never have happened, would have never been prosecuted because there was no case. I think the specter of the label of calling Barry Gedeus some type of sexual assault defendant has colored many aspects of what transpired back in March within the community, because he was not that, and he certainly wasn't someone who posed a threat. So we have a lot of labels being foisted on a man who ultimately was executed for no reason.
Thank you, Mr. Friedland. We are now at the 20.
My associate pointed out one thing, I don't mean to interrupt you. The shots, of course, were in the back. There's no evidence of front entrance wounds. I should have mentioned this before. No evidence that any of the wounds that Mr. Gedeus had entered through the front of his body, but rather all the 3 shots that resulted in his death were all to the rear of his body. So we again believe that is a significant factor to establish that he posed no threat to Officer Morris and should not have been killed.
Anything further, Mr. Friedland?
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We will now have questions by our commissioners. Commissioner Niikura, would you like to ask questions of the witness, please?
A very simple question. Had the police officer, when they attacked and have the body camera, is there any evidence?
We don't have.
Body camera?
Our understanding is that that's another, thank you for the question. His was not operational. Mr. Morris's body camera, we are told, was not operational at the time. There is body camera videos of other officers that responded.
Oh, really?
We don't have access to that yet.
Is the body camera evidence is available or not?
Not to us. Not at this stage. As long as we're in our jurisdiction, as long as the grand jury has been impaneled and the issues have not been heard, we don't have a right to get a lot of this evidence, and we don't get it. It's kept protected until the completion of the criminal aspect.
Did you challenge the case?
And we try to know, we have prepared
to get it.
Yeah, we've submitted documentation to get it under both public records, and we are filing a civil rights action case, and we're going to subpoena it. We do believe that they will seek to protect it under a privilege associated with the grand juries here.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Fournier, would you like to question the witness?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Attorney Friedland.
Good evening.
Yes, you said that there was an occasional encounter with a woman. Did she file any complaint, or she made a denounce or called the 911 against Mr. Gedeus?
She did. She sprinted. She ran to the scene. We believe under the influence. I think that's clear, at least based on our belief. She got on the phone. She called 911. She described a black man with dreadlocks riding a dark bicycle in dark clothing, which fit the description, and in fact was our client. She made allegations that she had been assaulted, and as a result, the police came to the scene to investigate this assault. She also made allegations that she had a knife, that she used her knife on the person that had committed the assault. And we do know from our review of the autopsy, we went down and viewed the body, that there was no knife, defensive wounds or otherwise, visualized on Barry Gedeus's body. She had a knife during the entirety of the supposed assault. So there was no conflict. And that's one of the reasons that we showed the video. But we're not holding Robert Morris to the standard that, like I said, he should have reviewed the video and understand that there was an allegation. We're saying that the allegation was on its face so spurious that it should have been investigated more carefully. And had it been investigated carefully, obviously, Barry is not dead. If Robert Morris, and I'm going to, I guess go out on a little bit of a limb here. If Robert Morris isn't the police officer, given his aggressive past, given the video evidence we have about his aggressiveness as a police officer and how he practices policing, Barry Gedeus is not dead. And the charges of whatever this young lady was going to bring would never have come to light because of the contradictory evidence that was apparent from the very beginning.
And the officer acted alone, Officer Morris, or with somebody else?
As far as we know, he chased Barry down the street. he took out his service weapon and he shot Barry alone. What happened afterwards in terms of other responding police agencies, we don't know yet, frankly. We've done our best to do the recreation we have, but until I have the discovery tools that are available in a civil rights case, I do have, in that respect, one hand tied behind my back.
You have spoken about the grand jury. So,
Yes, sir.
So he was charged with a murder, with murder or manslaughter or what?
In Broward County, the grand jury is frequently a tool. All police shootings go, the result in a death go before a grand jury. And it's used as a, I was going to research, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I've researched in my life. I've been practicing law for 28 years in South Florida, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach. I've researched police shooting cases in the entirety of my career, and there has not been one single grand jury finding in which a police officer has been indicted for the shooting of a citizen in Broward County. Now, again, whether that happened before my career or at some point, the grand jury is a political tool used here to whitewash abuses to the minority community. I don't want to get into sort of the political undercurrents of what we deal with here. We had a state attorney Mike Sachs, who's no longer state attorney, who every single police case he would personally prosecute. So there was a environment here that was very protective of police actions, and that's what is being evidenced in the investigation associated with Barry Gedeus.
So he was discharged by the grand jury.
He hasn't gone. They have not been able to impanel grand juries here due to COVID. So they've put off grand jury. We haven't had any. This issue has not gone before a grand jury here.
All right, so he has not been indicted.
Correct.
He hasn't been tried.
Correct. Yeah, we haven't had no, he has not.
No. All right. And were there any witnesses at that moment, apart from what the neighbors heard?
We have not identified any eyewitnesses at the moment of shooting, only witnesses following the shooting who took videotape of Barry lying dead.
And what the attitude of the police department? Were you able to obtain any cooperation or facility from them?
No, we were resisted at every step. It took a number of public records requests, legal FOIA requests, all the type of requests that we use to get even the most basic information. Now, I will say this, the FDLE, who investigates police shootings in Florida, have a liaison that has been contacting our office, did meet with our clients. Also, the lead attorney for FDLE reached out to me. Now, these types of dialogues are not very productive because it's more of a dialogue of us providing what evidence we have. And of course, because it's an ongoing police investigation, they share nothing with us relative to the investigation. We were shocked when we learned that Robert Morris was back on duty and patrolling the streets in Fort Lauderdale. If not for this case, for this history of violence, which should at least draw in question his ability to make sound judgments when policing the community in Fort Lauderdale.
So he's back on duty on his same job, the same kind, no change at all.
As far as we know, nothing. He's as Ms. Valbuena indicated, he's back. The Alexis, her fiance, his fiance was working in private security, and Robert Morris came there, and there was a discussion, and we know that he's back patrolling.
And so
we only have 50 minutes, so there are videos, snippets of videos that have been provided by individuals in the community of Officer Morris's interactions with the citizenry and how he views his job. And we believe that those videos, as well as his history of reaction and overreaction to situations associated with his job, put him in the position where he essentially executed Barry Gedeus because he believed him to be the sexual predator, and because in his effort to apprehend somebody he assumed had was some sort of inherent evil, struck him with his car, chased him down, and shot him dead.
was there any other litigation by the family, like a civil case?
We are the civil lawyers for that purpose. We do some civil rights cases. We have been retained. We, of course, did not want to get in the way of an ongoing police investigation or have the police investigation be tainted by the concept of some sort of financial gain. But as we've gone down the road and the police investigation is stalled, we think our remedy is going to be in federal court, which we have a complaint and we're preparing to file.
You also said that he alleged that his body camera was malfunctioning. Was there a possibility of taking the camera to a technician and check out if this is true or just a pretext?
Yes, there is, but that would have had to been handled by the FDLE investigators who were evaluating. I don't have, my hands are tied. My strength as an attorney is obviously, as you know, is my subpoena power and, FOIA requests. But my ability is to subpoena and or get into court. And with the rules as they exist for civil rights cases in our jurisdiction and nationally, we couldn't file our case until only recently. And now we are filing as soon as we can. Now, once I get that subpoena power, the types of things you're talking about, I'll be empowered with. Now, probably, I would guess, the opportunity to gather that evidence was probably passed. As to whether there had been some tampering or whether it's legitimate. We just know that he is asserting that there was no body cam at all.
Do you know if the officer alleged that he read the Miranda rights to Mr. Gedeus before shooting?
We're sure that didn't happen based on the scenario of at least what's displayed on the video that's been discussed with us and what the witnesses have indicated. We know that I think what is legendary with this officer, and I don't know if I've sort of highlighted enough in my presentation, is not just the number of 84 complaints of use of force, but the individual incidents that are outlined in terms of how he engages in this policing. And we think there was no Miranda, there was no one in the area heard anything other than shots being fired in the back of Mr. Gedeus.
Was there any internal investigation within the force, the police force?
Ultimately, although we haven't been provided it, they do their internal investigation, which will be subject to a public records request and information after we file our case, and then they determine what, we have not heard, frankly, the version of what Robert Morris says occurred during the struggle so that we can hold it up to the scrutiny of an attorney in the light of day. We don't know. We know he's back working, so that would indicate some process is completed.
So how do you find about the 84 other cases?
That's the public records request that we got his personnel file. We got a little idea of his background. We were given his use of force reports and issues that IA complaints and other things that might be in his background. So they give that to us. And that's how we were able to uncover a lot of these individual actions where Officer Morris was acting in an aggressive fashion in the course of his policing.
So apart from his personal file, what other record access was allowed to you, to your representation?
We got personnel file, use of force data, and then the other information we were able to gather was through the limited media coverage that we received down here. We spoke to family members of individuals in that community that have been subject to his policing. We also were able to investigate the circumstance of that 2008 shooting of Timothy Brown and reach out and speak to family members of Mr. Brown with regard to the grand jury process that transpired back then, whether or not Mr. Brown was armed during the course of the interaction with Mr. Morris. So that essentially is the scope. We also have our own investigators who went out into the community and asked questions. At one time, Officer Morris worked for and I'm going to get the term wrong, there was a jump out unit in which they were supposed to aggressively be involved in interdiction in the community. A lot of these programs that we're hearing recently that are being rolled back in communities because of the inherent hostility that they create with the communities that they're policing. He was involved directly in that type of unit. And when you see him and the way he interacts with the community, you can see he's infused with the concept, as I said earlier in my presentation, of the us versus them mentality. It drips from him. And it is an individual thing. And it's also clear that Fort Lauderdale Police Department is not doing anything to control him because of the number of incidents. And we're talking about an officer who continues to get put back on the street in circumstances where he can do harm to others.
Now that you spoke about the media, how do you feel? How do you assess the participation of the media coverage?
We ran into some initial problems because this occurred before George Floyd and during the initial parts of the pandemic as it was emerging here. So the shooting happens on March 8th. And then the country and the local media coverage, which is primarily what covers these events, gets involved in a lot of stories associated with COVID throughout the community. We had a very difficult time initially getting any coverage with this shooting. As the national circumstance obviously changed, and these sort of shootings came to light throughout in multiple jurisdictions, we started getting some media coverage. The local channels, we got some newspaper coverage. The New Times reached out, and they were very valuable in providing us with information and leads associated with Officer Morris and other people in the community that have dealt with him. So it was helpful, but it didn't happen immediately for us.
Was there any participation of the police union or just the police department?
The union has not been resistant in any way to our efforts to gather information in the case. It's just been Fort Lauderdale Police Department has been sort of obstructionist in the sense that they are protecting one of their own and continue to put them back on the street. That's the part that baffles the family and us even more. I mean, the cold-blooded nature of this, the shooting, the fact our client was unarmed, but you add to it the history of this particular officer, which is very clear relative to his ability to do his job. Even if the police department doesn't believe in our ability to prove under the legal standard that there was an excessive use of force, which we think is clear, he's clearly not fit to be an officer patrolling the communities that he's in.
In another case that we attended to, there was a recognition and apology by the police department regarding the law enforcement misconduct. Was anything of the sort in this case?
No, no.
Well, one last question. Ms. Greeny Valbuena, are you a lawyer or you were a witness?
No, I'm an attorney. I'm Lee Friedland's associate.
All right, many thanks.
Thank you.
I think that will be all for the moment. Of course, there are many, many other things that come to my head, but I don't know if Professor Niikura wants to ask a further question.
Yeah. May I ask some more question about? Do you have any knowledge about what kind of training normal local police officers receive, especially in the case of violent attack?
We know that they attend police academy training here locally, in which they're trained on the use of force protocols that we certainly would be happy to provide you all. I don't know if you received them in the context of your other evaluation of other police shootings, but there is a use of force policy of which officers like Robert Morris are supposed to be trained in terms of how, when, and where to use it. We know that there have been, one of the obstructions that we've received in this case, we know there have been changes to this policy over the years, and we don't know for sure whether there were any changes enacted during the time frame of the assault and the death of Barry Gedeus. But they're trained on these policies, supposedly, and Officer Morris will answer to his training when we have the opportunity to sit down with him. Sorry?
And did he follow the policy?
Not in our estimation. We believe that there has to be some use or legitimate fear on behalf of the officer that the fleeing suspect poses a threat to person or property, a significant threat to person. And we feel very clearly, based on what we've learned of the video evidence, that Barry Gedeus did not pose a threat to anyone. He was merely, actually, when Officer Morse hit him with his car, he was essentially running for his life from the overzealous actions of the officer.
So, something else, excuse me. From the human point of view, did Mr. Gedeus had any family, and how was his family informed about what has happened?
He had, I believe his fiance is on the call. He has his brother and his family. I think they were supposed to be on the call. We were originally scheduled, we believe, to be at 9, but we tried to get everyone here so that they could have an opportunity, because any opportunity they have to have the okay, we all I believe they're here. Any opportunity to have an airing of something so tragic that happened to them, they get a great deal of satisfaction. So I know they would want me to reflect how appreciative they are.
Lee, I'm sorry. I believe they're actually on. They're just we can't see them, but I think that they're like participants.
They were in shock when they learned of what happened, mostly, of course, losing someone that's so young, but also because of the persona or the character of Barry, of which they were familiar, which, I used the term earlier, mild-mannered. I mean, he was a sweet man who was engaged to his fiancée who's here. And when she learned, I mean, she's been a driving force in this case since the beginning. When she learned what happened, she gathered a lot of the initial evidence with the neighbors before we even got on the case. She created a vigil for him, or an area in that lot to memorialize what happened there. She's walked the neighborhood. She's been hungry for answers since the beginning, and that's what I know the whole family continues to desire in the case, and of course justice for him and what transpired.
We have 2 minutes remaining in the hearing, and I want to give my condolences to the family members of Barry Gedeus. We're very sorry for your loss.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I don't, hi, I appreciate all of you. I messed up the time, and I wonder if we could promote the family for 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes. Okay. Charlotte did it. Thank you. And thank you, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I messed up time.
Yeah, it's all right. We're here for you. You gave us the opportunity, so thank you for letting us do it. I appreciate everybody, you guys, all the work you're doing, and with all those papers and books behind you, I know you got a lot more work to do. So I appreciate everything, guys.
Thank you. And maybe we could go to I don't know. I know this is very strict, but maybe we can go to 7:55 Eastern. Charlotte, what do you think?
Professor Cohn, Marjorie, the rapporteur can handle any time changes that are taking place, but I did want to just allow Ms. Ross, if you're on and you want to unmute or turn your video on.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Alexis.
What is your name, please?
Alexis Ross.
And do you promise that your testimony before the Commission of Inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do.
Okay, please make any comments you like.
Just to comment on the question, how the family felt or how did the family find out. The police I believe the family said sometime in the morning, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, the police, 2 officers came to their door and said that Barry Gedeus was got into an altercation with his girlfriend, which is me, and I was at work. And the police came to arrest him, and he's dead. They gave the family a card and they left. That's that's just not a way to let someone know that their son or their loved one is deceased, not with us anymore. And a very important detail that I wish Mr. Friedland would have mentioned. Barry Gedeus, he gave me a call around 8 o'clock that night, and he told me that he was headed to Walmart to get groceries. When the next morning, when I found out that he was dead through a Facebook post that his brother posted, I went to the scene where they say that someone had been shot by the police. I went to the scene, and his blood was still fresh there. I could literally put my hand and his blood was on my hand. Not too far, not even a yard from where his blood was, there was a Walmart bag. The Walmart bag had no tores, no rips, no dirt stains or anything on it. Just blood on the bag. And next to that Walmart bag that had blood on it was the paramedic, a little baggie where they used the gloves and different kind of things to perform CPR. And that's just what really got me really puzzled. Like, I don't know.
I think what she's trying to say is we have yet to be able to determine, and we've tried to get security videos from the Walmart, if Barry ever made it to the Walmart ward or not, or the circumstances that led him to unfortunately be in the alley in the first place.
And I want to add one more thing. The house that's next to where Barry Gedeus died, it has cameras. I was told by the gentleman, not the gentleman that lives in the house, and another gentleman that lived next door to the house. They had Barry Gedeus' body lying there. They called out specialist technicians to go inside this man's house and take his video cameras, or to make sure it wasn't working, because he said that he just had the cameras there for visual, they didn't record. He had specialists come to the house to make sure that his videos didn't work. So what are you trying to hide? Your body cam didn't work. If it was a video that could tell what happened, you had someone come in and rip those systems out. What are you trying to hide?
Thank you, Ms. Ross. We appreciate your testimony and are so sorry for the loss of your fiance. This concludes the hearing in the case of Barry Gedeus. The hearing in the case of Travis Crane will resume at the top of the hour. Thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate everything.
Thank you.